good afternoon, Rotarians and guests. This is the Rotary Club of Toronto. I'm John Fortney, the club president, and I want to welcome you to the last and third session of our racism series. After the invocation and recognition of traditional lands, please stay tuned for the playing of the national anthem and the loyal toast. At this time, I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the traditional lands of many Indigenous peoples that have walked and cared for this land for 15,000 years. They include the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, the Treaty Peoples of the Mississaugas of the Credit. As we come together in fellowship today, help us to continue to be mindful of the footprints we leave during our journey through life. Footprints that will be lasting on our communities, in our families, and in our business. Let those footprints be based on honor, truth, and dedication. Let them be our own, for it is we alone who will be judged by them. Thank you. And now our national anthem. If you'd like to, please stand for the national anthem followed by the loyal toast. Ladies and gentlemen, the Queen of Canada. Thank you, Brigitte and Glenn. Always beautiful. Rotarians and guests, it is now my pleasure to introduce our head table. I'm pleased to have the following people with me today. Peter Stevenson, Rotarian since 1985, over 35 years. Classification, corporate psychology. He's a partner with Hirji Consulting, a member of our program committee, and our host and guest speakers today, who are Deputy Mayor Michael Thompson, Lake Goldring, Zabeen, Hirji, Shereen, Ashman, and Nigela and Wayne Purbo. We will hear about them more shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, our head table. For our virtual meetings, we don't have an official monitor to introduce visiting Rotarians and guests, so I'll proceed. I know we have a couple of potential new members. I think Sergio and Oleg, I want to welcome you. I hope you're enjoying today's meeting and look forward to seeing more of you. If you're visiting Rotarians, thank you for choosing our club for your makeup. We hope that you enjoy the meeting. To our guests, welcome to our virtual meeting today. Please feel free to contact the office and find out how you'll be able to make a difference by joining us. Rotarians, please welcome our visitors in the tradition of our great club. Before we get started, you should be aware that these virtual Rotary meetings, that if you have your video camera on when using Google Meet, you may show up on the YouTube or the Google Meet recordings or the live streaming. If you do not want to appear, please turn off your video. We will not be able to edit you out later. Thank you. Up next, we have a quick announcement from Deb Snyder and the marketing team. Over to you, Deb.
Is Rotary Toronto the right partner for your organization? We invite you to find out.
Represent your corporate culture and make an impact in your community.
Develop relationships and network with other leaders.
Be part of a powerful group of like-minded people who want to make a difference.
You're invited. Join us in making a difference. More power to you.
Visit rotarytoronto.com/point and fill out the form. Back to you, President John.
Thank you, marketing team. Doing an amazing job. I'm so thrilled about all this new material you've got coming out. Now for our third and final session in our racism series, I would like to pass the agenda over to the host of our speaker today, Peter Stevenson. Peter, over to you.
Thank you, President John. Hello and welcome to all who have joined us. During our Rotary meetings over the past 2 weeks, we've heard poignant accounts of living with racism in our communities from individuals who are Black, Indigenous, and persons of color. We've learned more about the negative impacts of racism, including systemic racism and unconscious bias, in continually asserting white privilege, with the too frequent impact of limiting opportunity and the realization of potential for those in our communities who are not white. Our focus today shifts to a call to action to stop racism. We're going to challenge ourselves to look in the mirror and what can we do as individuals, as Rotarians and Rotary clubs, and as a community? What can we do or do differently to help tackle racism? Today with us, we're going to hear from some folks who have given stopping racism a great deal of thought and are now taking action to address it. And as was mentioned in the slides earlier, if you have questions through the session, please email them to question@rotarytoronto.com. I'd like to begin this afternoon by welcoming 4 people involved in Toronto's Economic and Culture Recovery Advisory Group's recently released report that was titled Building Back Stronger. Deputy Mayor Michael, as long-serving City Councillor and co-chair of the advisory group, and as Deputy Mayor for the eastern part of our great city, could you kick off our session today with some summary comments about the purpose of the Economic and Cultural Recovery Advisory Group's work and why the public policy recommendations focused on anti-racism and inclusion and workforce and talent, which were 2 of the 4 areas of recommendations made by your group in the report, are so important to the post-pandemic New Toronto. Over to you, Michael, to kick us off.
Thank you very much, Peter, and good afternoon. And just before I begin, let me just say that I'm so delighted that the Rotary Club of Toronto has taken up this particular issue. You're an established organization that is respected around the world as an organization, and I'm very thankful that you have an interest in terms of, as the topic is enough, stop racism. Our group consists of 20 Torontonians from different backgrounds and different professional accreditation and environment, got together in order to work on bringing forward ideas and recommendations to the City of Toronto and the city manager. So our group is focusing on economic and cultural recovery, and the idea was to look at some of the challenges that we would be facing on our efforts with respect to recovery through as a result of the pandemic. We note as well that in advance of the pandemic, we had a variety of different challenges and gaps that existed in our society where many residents were falling behind and in fact were not seeing the success that many residents are enjoying in the City of Toronto. So this was an opportunity for us to identify some of the issues surrounding racism, some of the issues around inclusion, as well as what we could do to address the issue with respect to workforce and talent development. We know that with respect to the BIPOC and the Black community, Black youth, for example, in the city of Toronto, are facing an unemployment rate of between 22 to 26%. That's very significant. So we had to offer ideas and suggestions to the city of Toronto in terms of how to respond to these challenges that has been exposed as a result of the pandemic, but clearly were there before. We know as well that, racism, when we think about it in general, we think about it in terms of police brutality, but that's not the end of it, and that's not all of it, actually. There is an entire systemic nature to racism that exists in our society, in institutions, in the city of Toronto, large and small organizations in the city and businesses as a whole, and that speaks to part of the rationale and part of the problem for BIPOC and Black people actually gaining employment opportunity and so on in the city of Toronto. I'll just digress for a moment and tell you that as we look at who are the people who are being affected by this pandemic, we note that in the city of Toronto, the Black population is 9% of the city's population. Yet, with respect to the pandemic, we're seeing 26% of the cases dealing with this pandemic affecting the Black community specifically. There are other communities that are impacted as well. And so what we see there is that Blacks are, the people who are doing the jobs that they're not able to stay at home to do. They're traveling on the transit system. They're going into, settings where they're not able to social distance. We had problems with the community before where we had issues around housing, food insecurity. We have issues with respect to employment and so on. So all of these factors have given us the necessity of information in order to fill and try to address the gap that existed before the pandemic and the gap that has been so widened as a result of the pandemic. So there's a tremendous amount of work that we're doing in these particular areas. And so when we look at workforce and talent in that development, we have to look to see what are the things that we must do and implement in order to address these fundamental challenges that existed in society but has been made so apparent as a result of the pandemic. In particular about youth, and one of the recommendations is putting together a council that is looking at helping young people in terms of creating opportunities for them, but not just on a side. It has to be coordinated in a city that prides itself on diversity, because diversity is our strength. It's the city of Toronto's motto. And so if we are to live to our motto, if we are to create opportunities where we uplift others, all of us have an opportunity to make a difference in the lives of so many of our friends and our neighbors and so on who are not realizing the benefits that some of us take for granted. And part of the challenge we have in our society as well, we need to educate, and that's part of the recommendations that's contained in the report, because there is, as the points have been made about, the racism, the types of racism, the biases and the types of bias, the conscious and the unconscious bias. There are things that happens every single day in terms of microaggression that has an impact on the lives of so many people, but particularly on the lives of Black people in the city. And it's really important for us to all recognize that we all have a role to play. So it isn't simply a black-white, pull and entanglement. It's an overall societal entanglement where all others who may not be Black or white, but others, are also part of the equation in terms of how we address and deal with these particular problems. So the recommendations contained in the report, and my co-chair Blake Goldring is with us, and I'm so happy as Zabeen as well. We're members of this amazing advisory group. And of course, we'll talk a little bit further. But all of these, items that I've just spoken about are covered in the report. It's seeking to give the city manager and the city ideas around recommendation as we build back stronger we don't leave that group or groups that we had left behind before the pandemic going forward, because everyone has got to be brought forward and to create opportunities and so on. So that's the essence of the task force report, and it is being formed as part of the city manager's report, the Toronto Office of Recovery, in order to ensure that we have a game plan, because as we deal with the pandemic, it is not just that we're watching things go by, we're actually building back better as part of preparing ourselves for the recovery and the success.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor Michael, for getting us launched here. Blake, let me turn to you next as a co-chair of the advisory group and as a recognized business leader in our community. Could you provide us more insights around the report's recommendations focused on training and jobs for youth? Over to you, Blake.
Thank you, Peter. Just before I begin, I have to echo the Deputy Mayor's comments that you and your fellow Rotarians have done something truly incredible in launching this series, and how honored we are as the advisory group to be part of it, especially talking about the next steps, things that we do to address what we recognize anti-racism, but also inclusion, really critical. I also have to give a shout out to my very good friend, Jeffrey Johnson, who really, we were at a meeting for Christmas talking about this very important subject, and he told me about your series, and again, here we are today. So again, big thank you to him. Well, youth unemployment. This is just not a Toronto-oriented issue. This is something that impacts the entire country. No small town, no village, big city, or region of the country has left untouched by youth unemployment. In Toronto, we have a very special situation, though, where we receive roughly 40% of new arrivals to our country. And with them, we have a very youthful population. Now, I have to say that last June, we were faced with a 40% unemployment rate for youth 15 to 24 in Toronto. That dropped to 22% by late fall. But still, that was double the rate for the average Canadians. Many of you today probably were dismayed, as I was, when I saw that our jobs number, unemployment rising 212,000 in the month of January, relative to what was forecast, about 40,000. Now, when we talk about youth specifically, and we talk about a high unemployment rate, well, we certainly think of a pandemic and know that youth often will enter areas like hospitality industry. They might go into restaurants, tourism, athleticism. They go into areas of, where typically these are areas that have been especially hard hit through the pandemic. So we must look at ways so that when the economy reopens, that they can quickly achieve a job placement. Now, you sort of think about it. There have been many people who graduated, and if they remain unemployed, the pain of not getting a job, we risk having a number of our youth leaders not be properly engaged, and we can't have a generation of people who are forgotten. Now, one of the key recommendations the Deputy Mayor alluded to was that we are urging that a coordinated approach be taken as far as dealing with our youth. We want to form a youth economic recovery table, which would really focus on youth employment, training, and equitable access to opportunity. We're also calling for this to be a long-term commitment, not just a short-term fix as part of the recovery. This table would bring together leaders from government, business, unions, and not-for-profit organizations to develop immediate actions and long-term supports for youth to recover from this crisis. We also need to ensure that youth, especially those still in school, have opportunities to get on-hand experience through on-the-job type of activities within businesses. And, along that line, we're advocating there should be more apprenticeships, co-op placements, and internships. Well, with remote learning, it's very, very difficult to have that. But I guess it was an action step for your members and those who are in a position to do so. Look at ways in which you can engage students, commit to them, and find ways in which you can use their great skills and give them that on-hand priority, if you will, to training and hiring in the coming years. Supporting youth unemployment or employment is going to help diversify our workforce over the longer term, making obviously the youth better people. It'll make your companies better, and it'll make our country better. Thank you, and back to you, Peter.
Thanks very much, Blake, for sharing and providing us insight into these recommendations focused on youth and training. Zabeen, let me turn to you as a member of the advisory group, but also wearing your hat as executive advisor, future work at Deloitte, as chair of Civic Action, and as a former head of HR for the Royal Bank of Canada. Can you provide us more insights into the report's anti-racism and inclusion recommendations and their importance? Over to you, Zabeen.
Thank you, Peter, and I'm delighted to be here and maybe start by sharing my connection to the Rotary Club. I was born and raised in Tanzania, and my father was a Rotarian in the early 70s. So this is quite exciting for me to be contributing a small bit in his honor. He's my late father now. So I'm going to pick up on the setup earlier that really was made around action and what can we do as individuals and how that aligns with the some of the recommendations. I would start by saying that while we have specific recommendations around anti-racism, inclusion, talent, that this is anti-racism and inclusion are really infused in all of the recommendations that we see in the report, and given, as we've heard, our demographics, as Deputy Mayor said, 9% of Torontonians are Black, over 50% in total are members of visible minorities, and we also have a large Indigenous population. And so that's a really important piece, I think, for everyone. It's not just about specific initiatives, but it's how we infuse that into everything we do. The other piece that I would really want to amplify is these big issues require public-private partnerships, business, government, not-for-profits, unions, educators, and civil society, which is exactly what we have here today with Rotarians, individuals who want to make a difference in our communities. So let me talk a little bit about the jobs and the businesses, the two sort of arms of these recommendations. First of all, I think what cuts across all of them is some of the infrastructure needs. We need to ensure that everyone has access to technology, and something as simple as broadband connectivity. I have been on calls with people in Toronto who have had to turn their videos off because they don't have the bandwidth in the apartment buildings that they're living in, and that is creating another barrier for people who already have barriers. So this is an issue around broadband as well as just the cost of internet and computers that we can come together to really push. And we're all consumers of broadband with our providers, and having those conversations around how are we going to make sure that this is available in a cost-effective way. Access to capital, of course, to businesses is really important. We've seen commitments, we've seen government, we've seen banks make commitments, but there's also another piece to that around mentoring and coaching, the city's advisory services, and again, with Rotarians, how can you get involved in providing that mentoring and coaching? And finally, there's the convening power, and what you're doing here is yet another example. The city has convening power. You have convening power to bring people together and really have an impact even beyond our own borders. So how can you use that more? Because clearly you have it. In terms of jobs, there's one recommendation around long-term strategic workforce development. And this really is where the future of work plays in. But what I would really urge here is it's really important for us to keep an eye and resources on the longer term. We have urgent issues now, but we can't set aside the important because we want to build sustainability. It's not just about through the pandemic, but how are we going to build that in and have a plan that will see this wonderful city over the next decade to thrive and to prosper in the way we all want to. So that long-term plan, again, requires different levels of government, as well as all the actors, and, speak with your elected officials about this important focus on long-term planning. Some of you are business owners. Look at your own talent practices, recruitment for sure, but even beyond that, what happens with career development, with mentoring, with coaching? Who's getting those opportunities? How are promotions being handled? There's a lot of data out there. You mentioned I chair Civic Action, which is a city building, civic engagement organization. We just recently released a report along with BCG that gathered data from all sources. It's data that was there already, but we put it into one report. And Deputy Mayor, you talked about microaggressions, and one of the findings is nearly 60% of Black people reported experiencing microaggressions on the job. And what's really important to point out here, that microaggressions have a cumulative impact. It's not, sometimes people say, oh, what's the big deal? Just take it. They didn't really mean it. Well, the thing is, when it's happening every day, it's an exponentially cumulative impact, and people start to lose confidence in themselves. So that's something, not to be underestimated. There's a study done in Toronto that showed the bias that I would again refer you to. The study here used the same resume and cover letter with only two differences: whether the applicant had a white-sounding name or a black-sounding name, and whether the applicant referred to a criminal record. And this is what the results showed, that among those with no criminal record, the white resume received 3 times the number of callbacks as the black resume. No other difference, just the name. And when both candidates indicated a criminal record, the difference jumped to 12 times. So we know this is happening, and that's an example of a systemic bias, a systemic change that needs to happen in the process. So those are a few areas that are in the report that I wanted to amplify, and maybe closing off, Blake, with your comment around youth. We also have an Indigenous population in Toronto, and we know that in general, the Indigenous population is a younger population, and so the youth facing programs and commitments really can have an impact on those communities, on our Indigenous peoples in this area. Thank you. Back to you, Peter.
Thanks very much, Zabeen, for those somewhat sobering insights. Shereen, I'd like to bring you into the conversation as a co-founder and director of operations for the Center for Black Professionals. Can you tell us a little bit more about the work of the center? And I guess with this focus on action, can you highlight a couple of the center's initiatives that you feel are being particularly helpful in the fight to end racism? Over to you, Shereen.
Thanks, Peter. I'm happy to be here to share some insights. So, we discussed how racism, structural racism, is insidious and it permeates every area of our life, with dire consequences for Black and Indigenous populations specifically. And at C, we're really focused on mitigating some of the social and economic inequities. In particular, we really focus on building some of those private and public partnerships that was previously discussed. And for us, it's important that we just don't do that willy-nilly. We take a very directive and structural approach to that. We identify labor market gaps, and we identify industries that are challenged by diversity and inclusion, and we make a pointed effort to train Black youth to enter into those fields and spaces. But, to Deputy Mayor's point, it's not good enough that we just train them to enter into those spaces. We really do have to help them to cultivate their talent there and for retention there. So with our organization, we make sure that we wrap around our youth. That's the language that we use. And so we stay with them once they're into those fields for up to 2 years. And we support them to navigate systems, to navigate sometimes discriminatory policies, etc., issues that come up on the workforce. It's also important for us to advocate to the larger kind of Canadian tapestry about some of the direct things that youth, principally Black youth, are facing in the workplace. I mean, I can remember back to myself, my very first job at a burger joint and dealing with being called racial slurs. And this is an entry-level job, right? So what does that mean when we talk about career advancement, right? So we're looking at those concerns and dealing with them in a practical way using training, advocacy, education, partnerships. And now we're looking at supporting other Black-led and Black-serving organizations to be able to hold space, because we recognize that all Black youth are not going to come through C's doors. And so how do we do this work and support on scale? And it's important for us to really have this positioning that the challenges that we face in our labor market gaps is not a challenge of people. We have people. Deputy Mayor spoke towards the level of unemployment rate, and we should also identify that unemployment among Black professionals remains the same, even if you have a post-secondary degree, right? So we're getting education, but we're not having the access and the opportunities. So what do we do in that respect? We really do have to really focus on building partnerships across racial lines, cultural lines, industry lines, and making those spaces open and available for talent. And the last thing I will say is that for us at C, we're not only looking at training and building up and advancing the Black community, we have the Canadian larger economy in mind. So we know that businesses that have diverse teams and diverse management realize 19% increase in revenues by virtue of innovation. So it's not just that, we want to advance the Black community, that's important, but how do we advance the Black community to become contributing members to building a stronger Canadian economy, a Canadian economy that is powered by all the people so that we can have and compete on the global stage. So we're having two sides of the coins in mind here at C. Thank you. Back to you, Peter.
Thanks very much, Shereen, for those insights. And we've been flooded with questions here from our audience, which is wonderful, picking up on this notion of education. Some folks are saying, if we're going to get at systemic racism, don't we need to be active right from, nursery school and how we foster understanding of people who are different, right through to how do we manage our neighborhoods and whatnot. So we could spend a good chunk of our afternoon and into the evening, perhaps, with this. But I know that several of you have to step off for other meetings at 1. And so I want to wrap up this section with sort of a rapid fire response from each of the four of you. I mean, you've given a lot of thought to ending racism in our community. Challenge you to challenge us as listeners, participants in the session today, with the one or two things that each of us can do in our daily lives to take action to end racism. I'm going to turn it to you, Zabeen, first, and I'll come to you, Shereen, next. But Zabeen, what are one or two practical things that each of us can do?
Okay, so one, really quickly, as individuals, as businesses, support BIPOC businesses, amplify them with your friends on social media, use your social capital to actually help businesses grow. The second one will just take me a few more seconds to talk about, and that is to go on a personal journey as individuals and with your families to really deepen your learning. This is not a one and done. Oh, I read a book, I read an article, I talked to one Black person. That's not what this is about. This is about really using the power of relationships. Who is in your social circle? I just watched an amazing video by Verna Myers, who's VP of D&I at Netflix, and I have posted it on my LinkedIn post if you're interested. But you know, when she talks about this is a powerful quick quote, which is, biases are the stories we make up about people before we know who they actually are. But how are we going to know who they are when we've been told to avoid them and be afraid of them? So the challenge that I have here is look at your social circles. Do you have a Black person in your social circles? And if not, do something about it, because it's through the deeper relationships we connect as humanity, and we learn about ourselves. It's a safe space for us, and it's a safe space for them. Get comfortable being uncomfortable, and then amplify your learnings. It's not about perfection, it's about connection. And that I think is a way to get to our hearts, so that we can go from diversity being a fact in this city to inclusion being an act. And that's what I would want to leave with everyone.
Thanks very much, Zabeen. Shereen, a couple of quick insights from you, and then I'll come to you, Blake, next.
Okay, I'll offer two things. So we understand that diversity is a fact and inclusion is value-based. That's what I saw. Right. So I would challenge folks who are at the helm of corporations to take a look at your diversity and equity and inclusion initiatives. Not only that, but to journey map those experiences based on those individual identities. So as a Black person in your business, what does it feel like to be operating in that space? If I was an Indigenous person, what would that feel like? Because oftentimes when we create customer experiences or even employee experiences, we really don't take into insight those intersectional identities and how you're going to experience and navigate that space. So I would challenge you to do that. Other folks I know have said to me, like, Shereen, oh my goodness, this is so big, it's overwhelming, like, where do I start? I need some type of like framework. And I would point you to the one developed by Deepa Iyer, the social change map. And what it does, it outlines 10 roles that you can potentially kind of engage and experience in this work. I'm happy, Peter, to send you the framework after so that you can share it with your membership. Happy to do that. But in that framework, not only does it have some of those traditional roles that folks play in terms of being disruptors, visionaries, etc., but it talks about if you want to be a guider, what does that look like? If you want to be a caregiver, what does that look like? A healer. So, you know, the way in which racism is insidious and permeates every area of our life, we have to also meet it with a multi-pronged approach. And so I would offer those. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Shereen. Blake, a couple of final nuggets from you, and then I'll give the last word to Deputy Mayor Michael.
Yes, thank you, Peter. You know, Rotarians are great community builders, and you think about what matters to you. You think about a very strong city. You think about a very strong Canada. I truly believe, and that's the premise of our report, that economic opportunities for everyone. That's what, no matter what the background is, where they live, who they are. That is critical. So we can all play a role in that. And in doing so, we will build back stronger. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks very much, Blake. Deputy Mayor Michael, the final word to you in terms of actions we can take to really impact racism in our city.
Thank you very much, Peter. And I would say that we need advocacy from broad-based leadership. We've had advocacy as it related to, you know, drinking and driving, women in the workforce, a variety of different issues where leaders have led and advocate on behalf of the issue, and we need the broad-based leadership advocacy. The other piece that we actually need is, well, we need to focus and target the issue around education. Many of our young people in the educational system are being, subjected to racism in the daily efforts to learn. It amputates their very spirit and desire in the education system to learn. And so we then say, we expect more of you. That can't be. We really need to do more. And I think that I want to just leave this group with one final thing. Racism and bias, those are learned behaviors. And so we have to unlearn those behaviors. So we all have to be educated. We want a better society. We don't want to overthrow society with one group, bring another group, and bring the same type of totalitarian and or racism. We want a just society, a balanced society. We want to be able to work together. So everybody needs a helping hand. So over back to you, Peter, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you, all of you, Michael, Blake, Zabeen, and Shereen, for sharing your work on the advocacy group's report, and more importantly, for providing us with insights about actions that we can take as we all work together to end racism. I know that several of you have other meetings, and so I have to leave our call now, but thank you so much for being with us today. And Michael, thank you. You've really done a great setup and segue into the second part of our program, so thank you for that as well. Thank you all for joining us. I'd now like to move into the second part of today's program by welcoming Nigela and Wayne Purbo. They're co-founders of the Onyx initiative. Onyx is an exciting new initiative to tackle systemic racism in our Black communities, and as Michael was just saying and others, to increase the pipeline of Black talent for organizations. So Wayne, before we talk about Onyx, I'd really appreciate it if you could introduce you and Nigela to our audience by telling us a little bit about your backgrounds before you conceived of the Onyx initiative. So over to you, Wayne, to give us some of that background.
Thank you very much, Peter, and thank you, Rotarians, for this audience. Nigela and I are very grateful for the opportunity to talk about Onyx. I grew up in Malton, and some of you may know Malton. Went to school in McMaster, and spent the last 30 years building technology companies, and fortunately been successful at selling those companies. My last company was bought by AT&T in 2016. I spent 4 years in California as SVP of video services there, which include DirecTV, Uverse, and all of the video properties that AT&T owns. Came home just in time to avoid being stuck in the U.S. during the pandemic in January. And I spent all of my life dealing with being a Black entrepreneur, which is very, very rare, even more rare in Canada. So a lot of the issues that we're dealing with, I understand, right to the marrow of my bone. So, but with that, I just want to introduce my wife, Nigela, and Nigela will tell you a little bit about herself and tell you how we came about starting Onyx.
Good afternoon, everyone, and again, I'd like to say thank you. Also, we really appreciate all that the Rotarians are doing to raise awareness of the systemic inequities that are still prevalent in all areas of our society, and your desire to be a catalyst for change in helping to eliminate the anti-Black racism and bias. I graduated from Western University with a master's in cultural anthropology, specializing in human rights and race relations work. After graduation, I worked at a number of different organizations, most notably the Urban Alliance on Race Relations, the Race Relations and Policing Unit of the Solicitor General's Office, and the Toronto District School Board. All of these efforts were aligned with my passion for human rights and anti-racism work. It also aligned very heavily with Wayne and I's philanthropic efforts that focus on healthcare, social justice, and education issues. So I think for Wayne and I, the events that happened last year with the murder of George Floyd and the, police brutality and the pervasive, social inequities and political and social unrest, it really weighed very heavily on Wayne and I, and just the the adverse impact it had on so many people around us and in the broader area. So typically, Wayne and I would, make a donation to a charity that was doing work in the area. But we felt that the gravity of the situation required more of us. We felt that our experience and our resources and network could, do more. So we started thinking about what contribution we could make. And we identified a systemic gap in the recruiting and selection of Black college and university and recent graduates in internships and full-time roles in corporate Canada. So we had this hypothesis, and then we contacted a management consulting company that came and collaborated with us, wanted to partner with us on this. And they were amazing. They've worked with us for over 8 months to help bring the data and the research to our hypothesis, and it was quite incredible. It really, bringing that data and research really helped fortify for us the need for Onyx. The data, showed what other people on this panel have spoken about in terms of, the starting from a very young age, the disproportionate number of Black students that get expelled from school. It's 3 times more than their white counterparts. It showed that Blacks are underrepresented in all of the higher paying jobs, but overrepresented in the lower paying jobs. It showed startlingly that the higher the education of Black people, the bigger the discrepancy, the wage gap to their white counterparts. So we were looking at all this data, and we said, okay, we really need to do something to help this demographic. Education has always been really important for Wayne and I. We believe it's a great equalizer and levels the playing field. We also are passionate about working with the youth. We feel that they're the leaders of the future. They're the change makers, and you saw this a lot at a lot of the marches that took place. So Wayne and I decided we formed a working group of corporations, educational institutions, and community organizations. And we worked tirelessly for like 6 months with TD, Bell, Manulife, PwC, Brock, Ryerson, McMaster. And we did roundtables, we had meetings, and they helped us to shape and define the Onyx initiative. And it's a very simple premise that, all men and women who seek gainful, employment should have the equal opportunity to do so. And so the purpose of Onyx is to expand that pipeline, expand that, the Black talent pipeline to, eliminate the systemic, barriers that Black college and university students and recent graduates face in the recruitment and selection of roles in corporate Canada. So I'm going to pass it on to Wayne to explain more of the model and the program.
So very quickly, just to amplify what Nigela's talking about, what we identified through the research is a real lack of social capital. And when we talk about social capital, so much of placement for youth is a result of who you know. and the social networks that you participate in, which university you went to, who your father is, what community you live in. So much of that first-time employment was just around social capital. And so what we've defined a program to help to bridge that social capital, to lean on others with some of that social capital to get access to opportunities. Fundamental to the program, and this is the entrepreneur side of me, it had to be sustainable. It had to also be scalable. So the program is designed with no donations, no government funding to support itself. We are going to continue to grow based on a mutual value exchange between the corporations and the students to find this talent. Our management consulting firm helped us with this program because Nigela and I did not want it to be a normal charity. We believe there is tremendous value for Canadian corporations to hire from this pipeline, and they've agreed. So Onyx is a subscription service. All of our corporate partners subscribe to get access to this talent pool. On the other side, as Shereen said earlier, we are not just providing an unworthy talent pool, a talent pool that's not ready for Canadian corporations. A big part of our program, we've partnered with LinkedIn. Students will be going through about 14, 15 hours of online training to prepare them. And this is the soft skills to build, again, that social capital I talked about them missing. There are conversations that white families have at the dinner table that Nigela and I know for a fact that Black families are not having at the dinner table. We want to facilitate all of those gaps. LinkedIn Learning is a great tool to do that and allows our program to scale. We've also built our own internal portal. So all of our scholars have access to our intranet where we're publishing news, and we have hundreds of opportunities on our intranet that our corporate partners have provided to us that our Onyx scholars can apply to. And so this is the structure of the program. Our hope over time is that we will be placing about 1,000 students a year into corporate Canada. We made an announcement on Wednesday. Our first cohort is 170 students. But again, for Nigela and I, it's not about having a one-year impact. We believe this, because of this value exchange, because we built it to be sustainable, this can go on for a long, long time. Now, one of the questions that always comes up when we start talking about the programs is, what about other demographics that need help? There have been a number of other leaders from other demographics that have reached out to Nigela and I that would like to use this structure, take advantage of some of the work we've done. We are more than open. We just don't feel that we can authentically launch programs for the Indigenous or Muslim community, other communities that would benefit from such a program. But we do anticipate that this program will cross-pollinate into other demographics. This particular demographic, we felt strongly needed an intervention. Despite a number of efforts from government, from businesses, it just has not worked. The statistics are getting worse. And so we felt that an intervention, something different had to be done. We're still learning. There's still lots of issues. Nigela and I are working all day long on this, and things are always popping up. It's not perfect, but we believe we're moving in the right direction. We're fortunate to have, over 65 empathetic organizations that are now part of the program. And we are learning as we go, and we're making changes. But we believe that this intervention has a very, very high probability of success. Thank you, Peter. I'll turn it back to you.
Well, a quick question for you, perhaps Nigela, you can take this one. But if corporations or businesses are interested in becoming sponsors and partners with the Onyx initiative, how can they do that? What's the process they go through?
You can go on our, anyone can go on our website. It's onyxinitiative.org. And it has, all the more details about our program. And you can also email at info@onyxinitiative.org.
That's great. And a follow-on question on the flip side of that, what if we know of, or if folks listening happen to be Black students who might benefit from being a part of the initiative, joining a subsequent cohort? How do people apply, or how are they selected to become a part of the initiative?
Yeah, the same website. So there's a big apply button on our website for students, and they can apply. What's interesting about our program, obviously being very focused on diversity and inclusion, we didn't want to bring some of those biases into our selection process. We are very fortunate that here in Canada we have a company called Plum that I know Scotiabank is using. There's a number of organizations around the world that are using that uses artificial intelligence to assess talents. It doesn't just select skills, competency. It doesn't look at the first name, last name. It just identifies talents, and we use a talent matching mechanism for selection to the program.
We find that the traditional way of hiring and screening people is quite biased and doesn't take into consideration the privilege that comes along with it. So this Plum profile is a behavioral assessment. So it will identify and give insights into the scholars' top talents, their work style, and their work preferences. And we use that in the matching process. We also, a big part of our program that we haven't really touched on right now is the mentorship and coaching aspect. This is an integral part of our scholars program. We are just launching that aspect of it, and we believe that this is going to make a significant difference to our scholars to have these, professionals who are coaches to them, not just when it comes to their internship or full-time job, but they will follow them throughout their career, because we're not just about the recruitment, we're about retention and promotion. So coaches and mentors will change over time depending on where the scholars are in their journey.
Yeah, we've built it into our cost model to be part of their lives for a number of years. All of the Onyx scholars that go through our LinkedIn Learning will get an Onyx accreditation that will be on their LinkedIn profile. And employers will be able to see that they've gone through this training program and that they're ready for their organizations.
And applications are ongoing. We accept applications all the time, and we will be, selecting our next cohort in May, starting in June.
Yeah, we're recruiting right now. So if there's anyone out there that wants to apply, please come to our website and apply.
It's a really exciting program. Wayne, what will success look like for Onyx down the road? How have you two thought about what success looks like?
Well, I mean, for me, it's a startup, right? It's a social entrepreneurship. So, getting into sustainability, we would like I said earlier, we'd like to place 1,000 students a year into corporate Canada. But longer term, Nigela and I talked about it, that we hope that systemic racism will end and we can shut down Onyx. We hope that the environment, the corporate environment will change, and a lot of the biases, a lot of the things we're dealing with right now will not require this intervention.
And just to add to that, Peter, so I would say that in the short term, the number of scholars that we can place in internships and full-time employment will show us a certain level of success. And long-term, in terms of our partnership with LinkedIn Learning, we'll be able to follow these scholars for their entire journey, their entire career. So significant achievements of them, like advancing to managerial and executive positions, we'll be able to track them. It's really important for us to collect that sort of data. another, really big element of success is for our corporate partners. And in our roundtable discussions, we kept on hearing that repeatedly that they were having difficulty finding Black talent. So our ability to help these companies achieve their higher promotion objectives is a key criteria for success, and for them creating more inclusive work environments will be a major measure of success also.
We're very fortunate that, some of the largest companies, some of the biggest companies on the TSX are participating in this program. And folks like Bell and TD, they remain on our advisory board, and we have quarterly advisory meetings where we are very transparent about where we are. And we are able to lean on them to get advice, to get more guidance in terms of this program. So it's not just Nigela and I shaping this, and our management consulting partner, who we can't tell you who they are, but they're fantastic. They're still involved. The one point that we did make, and I want to make sure folks understand that this is a national program. So we have students from across Canada, UBC, we've got kids from Nova Scotia, we have French kids. Yeah, so there is a high concentration in Toronto, but it's only about 2/3. The other third is outside of Toronto, and we intend over the next couple of years to recruit more from outside of the Toronto area, because there are a big population in Alberta, Nova Scotia, and Montreal of Black talent that our corporate customers would like to get access to.
I want to thank you, Nigela and Wayne, for joining us today and sharing with us this really remarkable program that you are creating. I think what's exciting to me is it's a really inspiring example of individuals really stepping up to take action and to deal with racism in our community and in our country. So thank you for your leadership on that, and thank you especially for being with us today. Thank you both.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate the opportunity.
So I want to close out our session today. Over the past 3 weeks, we've heard compelling stories about the hurts, the harms, and the limitations to opportunity and realizing individual potential that's caused by racist behavior and systemic racism in our society, and really embedded, as we've heard earlier today, in our institutions, in our policies, and social structures. We've also heard stories in the prior sessions and again today of actions taken by individuals and groups to stand up to and to try to fundamentally address racism in the community around us. My takeaway from our speakers is that, as was mentioned earlier by Shereen, that while diversity is a fact in our communities and in our country, inclusion, and by inclusion I mean that the conscious decisions we make moment to moment to listen to or to value, to engage with, and to support and provide opportunities to those who are different from us. Inclusion is a choice. So it begs the question then, what can we do? Well, I think as we've heard today and in some previous sessions, our opportunity as individuals is to challenge ourselves to be more aware of our racial biases and to take action to educate ourselves and positively engage with people who are different from us. And as several have mentioned, this can start with very simple actions. We can be more conscious about how we acknowledge and engage with people we see and meet, especially those from backgrounds that are different from our own. We can seek out and support even more businesses owned by people, again, who are different from us. We can participate in cultural events sponsored by other communities. I mean, it's Black History Month this week, and the Toronto Black Film Festival is running from February 10th to 21st. It's all online this year, easy to access. I think also as individuals, we can actively support groups who are working to end racism in our communities. I think as a Rotary Club, supported by our club's charitable foundation, we have a long-standing tradition of identifying needs in our community, partnering with frontline groups to learn about what will really make a significant difference, and then working to establish lasting solutions. Our club, for example, helped found Youth Employment Services over 30 years ago. YES empowers youth to become more self-sufficient and contributing members of society, and has become a model for similar youth employment and counseling programs across the country. YES served more than 12,000 youth this year from broad communities. Obviously, the work that Nigela and Wayne are doing is going to focus more intensely on supporting scholars through into college and university, but all of these efforts are helpful. On the health and social support focus, we funded the St. Michael's Hospital Transition Center and the Rotary Health Buses to provide ongoing health and support to marginalized individuals and folks living on the street. Over the past 8 years, our club's Indigenous Services Committee has partnered with Indigenous agencies and groups to support the expansion of services to individuals and families. We also helped found Honoring Indigenous People, HIP, which has grown to be a national partnership between Rotary clubs and First Nations across the country. I give these few examples not to boast, but to make the point that the Rotary Club of Toronto and other Rotary clubs across the country and around the world have track records of partnering with our communities to make a difference. And so, through this speaker series and an upcoming meeting with the chairs of our various philanthropic service committees, we're going to be challenging ourselves as the Rotary Club of Toronto to identify more direct actions we can take to help end racism, and we challenge other Rotary clubs to do the same thing going forward. And finally, to the community groups who have participated in this speaker series, thank you for joining in on these calls. And if you see opportunities where our club or Rotary clubs in your area may be helpful partners to you in your work to tackle racism, please reach out to us. So I want to conclude by thanking again all of today's speakers for contributing their voices, their experience, their insights to our conversation about stopping racism. I think as we leave this session, the opportunity for each of us and the hundreds of us who have engaged with these speaker series is now to turn our learnings and insights into meaningful action to help end racism. We each need to make a difference. Back to you, President John.
Thank you, Peter. I want to thank Deputy Mayor Michael, Blake, Zabeen, Shereen, Nigela, and Wayne. Your insight and your roadmap for us has been a great help, and everything we've done in the last 3 weeks has, I think, been a learning curve and a wake-up call. Obviously, it's a little bit preaching to the choir, and Rotary has been working hard. There's one thing I've not heard a lot of, which I think needs to be spoken about, is the early days. I think so many people in the marginalized communities that don't have access to proper housing or education, they don't have the same schools, and it starts that early even. And I think a lot of the work that we do at Rotary helps. But the problem for us is a lot of the marginalized communities have been moved out of downtown Toronto, and they've been moved out to the suburbs, to Malvern and Northern Etobicoke and Jane Finch, and they're sort of out of our view, if you will. And I think it behooves us to search them out to make sure that we're in touch and looking after these communities and making people have the same opportunities that we have. I also mentioned in the first series that I'm very proud of the diversity of our particular club. And I've been in for 21 years. It was a fairly white, fairly male organization at one time. And we have diversified quite beautifully. But I don't know how much people outside of our club know that. And we have to, all part of inclusion is letting people know that we are welcoming and accepting and we can be one of those forces of inclusion. And some of these inclusions are simple, like if you're at a family table and you hear someone say something that doesn't sit well with you, that that's racist, or that's homophobic, that's misogynist. Speak up. Just say, I don't like that talk. It's not right. And you have to start simple like that. Jeffrey and Sylvia and the team putting this together has been just, you have surpassed all of our imaginations as to where this could have gone. And I hope that we'll be able to take it much farther. You've done an amazing job. The people that you have reached out to join us have just offered incredible insight and inspiration. And I thank you for doing that. Anyone who is watching this who's not in Rotary and would like to help us with this problem and all the other things that we deal with, please reach out. I know we've got 2 potential new members, Oleg and Serge are here. I hope they enjoyed and learned and are more excited to join us. And if you're not in Toronto or near us, there's lots of Rotary clubs around the world, 1.2 million members. So we can help address problems like this wherever you are. So I would like to thank everyone. And a donation has been made in the honor of our speakers today to Water First, Canada's leading charitable organization working with First Nations communities to resolve local water challenges through education, training, and meaningful collaboration. Since 2009, Water First has partnered with over 40 Indigenous communities in Ontario, Quebec, and Labrador on a variety of education and training projects focusing on drinking and environmental water. This donation is made in partnership with the Rotary Club of Toronto's Indigenous Service Committee. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for participating. Next Wednesday, February the 10th, will be our virtual President's Cocktails at 5:30 in lieu of a Friday the 12th meeting due to the Family Day long weekend. We hope to see everyone there. Please contact the office to receive the link to connect. This meeting is adjourned. I want to go out and have a colorful and wonderful and diverse weekend. Thank you for joining us.